Good morning. Welcome to the King Institute for Faith and Culture. I am delighted to see you here on this Monday morning. My name is Martin Dotterweich. I direct the King Institute, and particularly pleased this morning as we host yet again our student lecture series. Every year, faculty are asked to choose two rising seniors to speak on something of interest to them. And it's a delight this time to have it be somebody I know well in Aidan Swatzell. I'm going to ask Kyle to come up in a moment and introduce Aidan. I do have a couple of quick announcements on our final events for the semester for those of you who are trying to make your hours. Especially next Monday, we host Esau McCulley. Esau is a New York Times columnist. He also is the author of Reading While Black and How Far to the Promised Land. He teaches at Wheaton College, and he'll be here as our Frederick Buechner lecturer. That's so next Monday at 9:15. He'll then be at First Presbyterian Church at 7. The following week, our final event for the semester on November 13th is a law professor from the University of Virginia. Her name is Barbara Armacost. Two of our recent students have studied with her at UVA and really love her, and so on their recommendation, we're bringing her to come and speak about a theology of policing. This will be on November 13th at 9:15, and that evening she'll be at Central Pres at 7 o'clock. For this morning, we continue a tradition that began around 1959 at King. It's been going a long time, and we'll welcome Kyle Osborne to introduce our speaker.
I've had many great students in my 10 years of teaching at King, and I've got many great students now, but I'm not sure I've ever had a student quite like Aidan Swatzell. He is universally liked and respected by his classmates, his teammates, his teachers. In his classes, he has shown creativity, curiosity, a sly sense of humor. In history, maybe most profoundly, he has shown a powerful trait, a profound sense of empathy, a willingness to see the world and history through the eyes of other people, to do so with respect and true respect, not just with lip service. This weekend, I thought about some grand rhetorical flourish to say about Aidan. Maybe something about how he epitomizes the very mission of King University. Maybe something about how he's everything a liberal arts Christian college could ever hope to produce. Maybe even something about how I have 2 daughters and no son. And if I had a son, I wish he would be something like Aidan, except like 5'10", like normal size. But this isn't my style. I'm notoriously flippant, so I'll just say this instead. Around a year and a half ago, I started making the joke that if King University had any sense, they would fire me and hire Aidan Swatzell to take my place. And as Aidan nears graduation in graduate school, the 18 hours requisite to teach college, as he continues to excel inside and outside the classroom, this joke has stopped being funny. But I stand by what I said. He's a student, a classmate, a friend, and if there's any justice in the world, our future professor of American history. Please welcome Aidan Swatzell.
Thank you for that very warm welcome and all of you making it out here today. Before I get started, let's open up in prayer, if you would, please. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us all safely here today. Thank you for this opportunity to come up here and share something that I think really matters with these people. Allow your wisdom and peace to speak through me and give us a good rest of the day. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, happy eve of Halloween, October 30th. Although most of you have already celebrated Halloween this weekend, I'm sure, hoping you still find some time to enjoy tomorrow, some candy and spooky stories. Although I must confess, I'm not a big fan of horror myself, although over the past couple years, I've been quite interested in this one particular genre of existential horror known as American politics. Though domestic issues and divisions are not the focus of this lecture. Instead, I'm going to be looking at what we've done internationally, our current situation, problems, attitudes, and what we instead should be doing. I found this talk necessary to give because I noticed over the past few years a growing sense among my fellow countrymen of a desire to withdraw from international relations and to instead focus on our own issues, and may call upon claims of past American isolationism and neutrality to justify this. I hope today to demonstrate why these claims are mostly false and how this would damage the United States position and Americans like you. To give you some background information, we're going to have a very quick history lesson where I run through some of, in my opinion, the more important events and decisions that previous administrations have made in the past in regard to foreign policy. So let's start at the beginning. Washington, being the leader of the first American Republic administration, has required establishing a lot of precedent about how the new government would run, including the State Department. However, perhaps his most influential legacy comes in his farewell address, where he advises the young republic to stay out of European affairs. While this is likely good advice for the time, Washington likely did not ever envision the position of the U.S. now and as a superpower, and so I would not count this to be wisdom today. Despite this, the address is still regularly featured in the American imagination of what America should be, and you can still find very many voters that still hold to this opinion of staying out of Europe. And so I see fit to include it. Moving on to Jefferson, was Washington's Secretary of State and believed in minimal government power, and so ran a skeleton crew of a grand total of 8 state government officials and major cuts to the Navy as well that was built up by the previous Adams administration. However, trouble came to him despite his desiring to withdraw and perhaps follow Washington's advice in the form of British impressment of American sailors, as well as raids by Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean. So this can go to show how often trouble in Europe can come to you instead of you going to them, and that maybe Washington's advice isn't quite so practical after all. Also, he made the Louisiana Purchase despite not having the explicit constitutional power to do so, which can show some of our first taste of realist ideas in American government. Doing something not because it perfectly coincides with your values, but instead it falls within your own self-interest. So be sure to look out for this. We're going to see this quite frequently, and it's going to be a theme we're going to explore a little bit more on the end, including positive and negative consequences of these ideas. Next, on to the Monroe Doctrine, Monroe administration and the Monroe Doctrine. Louisiana Purchase and the economic development of the country has now led the United States to become a regional power, and with it can afford to make some bolder moves. One of the most famous stances in foreign policy is the Monroe Doctrine, which states the U.S. will intervene in any European attempts to interfere in the Western Hemisphere in return for staying out of European affairs. This is especially important since South and Central America had just begun engaging in a series of revolutions from their European motherlands. This promoted American ideal as a defender and example of freedom to the rest of the world, which is still commonly in the United States imagination today. And it also gave a practical way to exercise this ideal. Although it should be noted that Great Britain also was interested in keeping Europe out of North America, so they helped with that. The United States likely wouldn't have had the power to keep Europe out by themselves, but it's still an exercise in hard power. Additionally, this with Washington's address supports many contemporary ideas that the United States should be more isolationist instead of expansionist. So the next administration will show why that hasn't always historically been the case. James K. Polk, he's a fun politician because he had 4 objectives coming into election: to take Oregon, take California, create a sub-treasury, and lower tariffs. He accomplished all 4 of these, but in doing so likely set the United States on an inevitable track towards the Civil War. So hey, it goes to show maybe politicians making all their promises and fulfilling them might not always be the greatest thing. So this can show how the United States had a desire for expansionism, especially towards the West and manifest destiny, and how that expansion was justified by the expansion of democracy worldwide. So it can be seen as more of a cautionary tale of the consequences of single-mindedly going after a single objective, and also how conquest can lead us to more inevitable damage in the future. So moving on to Theodore Roosevelt. The United States, in between, Theodore fought in the Spanish-American War, but he was not president during it. But that war included, it helped with reconciliation after the Civil War, and also led to more American expansion, especially against a former European country, which was different, perhaps, in the imagination of many Americans than expansion against the native tribes in Mexico. Also, Theodore Roosevelt featured big stick diplomacy, which is another feature of realist ideas, where you exercise power in the world around you in order to get your way and ultimately in pursuit of your own agenda. Next, on to Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is, in many ways, a man of his time in that he followed in the intellectual footsteps of figures such as Darwin and Freud, and those that said that man-made ideas and institutions can lead to lasting peace and greater good in the world. This would in some ways be shattered by World War I and then completely decimated by World War II. But in the interwar period of time, there was a substantial effort by many, especially Wilson, in order to create a world in which World War I could never happen again. And this pursuit of this ideal came about in the formation of the League of Nations. Was basically the pre-beta version of what is now the UN. So, but in doing so, he wasn't able to get the United States to join in the League of Nations due to Congress' fears over issues of sovereignty as well as being drawn into foreign conflicts. And Wilson even pushed so hard for this idea they ended up having a stroke while campaigning, and it was rumored that his wife was then running the government after him. So this can go to show how, so this is the first sort of big sample of idealism in American politics where you are chasing after the idea of America as a leader of the free world instead of what can maybe practically be more achieved, and how this can be damaging to the United States as a whole as well as to you personally, being able to push this hard with so little success. Next, moving on to Truman. After World War II, the United States found itself as one of the two world's leading superpowers and in a fight against communism as an ideal. And during this, we adopted a foreign policy doctrine entitled containment, which every single administration would have some flavor of for the remainder of the Cold War. Truman was, of course, being the first to do it. And this sort of enters into a new era of United States foreign policy where we assume we are going to be involved in foreign issues rather than waiting for foreign issues to come to us. So already we're seeing the shift from a more isolationist idea to a more proactive one. All right, next, Lyndon B. Johnson. A lot of modern day foreign policy issues, especially around intervention, stem from Vietnam. And a lot of the changes to the American idea of who we are and what we do that caused. It was very interesting because Johnson didn't want at all to really be involved in Vietnam, although maybe by looking just at his policies, you might not otherwise think that. He instead was much more focused on domestic issues, the Great Society. That was what he had campaigned on and wanted to focus on. But instead, he found himself drawn into this seemingly inevitable and unwinnable situation that he himself hated to be in. And so this sort of goes to show that even if you want to focus on yourself, it's very hard to run from foreign issues. A lot of times it will come and seek you out. Anyway, next, moving on to Nixon. Oh. Sorry, force of habit. By the way, students, anyone taking any of Osborne's classes, if you just put down Richard Nixon as the answer for every test question, you ace the class. That's definitely true. Don't fact check it. Right, so Nixon, for real. Did end up pulling us out of Vietnam. A lot of people like that quite a bit. As well as in Nixon, we see a revival of realism sort of in a different way. Other than using force to get what we want, we instead use diplomatic means and withdrawal from previous conflicts in a policy known as détente, which is just sort of a relaxation in the Cold War. In this, we see easings of relations with the newly established communist China, as well as the Soviet Union, which were quite popular at the time. And I think it might not be completely unreasonable to say that if not for Watergate, Nixon might have remained one of our more popular presidents in American memory. Excuse me. So this can sort of go to show how realism can be used in a different way, as well as perhaps maybe using hard power to exert our influence all the time might not always be the most beneficial option, such as when you're planning a workout, you shift between different intensity at different times. You know, first you go very hard, then you relax your exercise, then you go hard again. Sometimes perhaps this might be useful as well in foreign policy to give citizens a break from certain pushes and things that we want internationally, as well as keeping up pressure on foreign enemies. All right, next moving on to Carter. In response to Watergate, Carter is a complete rejection of everything that Nixon was and did, and was instead much more idealist, sort of calling back a bit more to how Woodrow Wilson was in his policies and moves. He gave Panama Canal back to Panama. He housed the Shah from after he was deposed from Iran, and things of that nature that were seen as nice, perhaps a good thing to do morally, but they weren't great for American interests. They didn't help us advance our agenda, they didn't help us get influence, they didn't help us win the Cold War. And a lot of times, his own idealism would even run in conflict with his own party, where a congressman would later mention that he favored working with Reagan later on over Carter because Carter would not compromise his ideals in order to get domestic legislation passed. And so, again, we kind of see this over-focus on ideals restrict the amount that you can get done in the world. Next, sort of in between Nixon and Carter, we have Reagan a bit. So he started out very hard power-focused, sort of a rejection of Carter's playing patty cake a little bit on the international stage and wanting to, much more willing to use force in order to get things done. However, as the Cold War endured on and he started gaining a much more rapport with Gorbachev, he started a bit more of a relaxed approach to that, and that helped give the Soviet Union the opportunity to relax themselves, which is argued by many historians, helped to end the Cold War. Additionally, another thing that helped with this was the pushing of the military budget. This kept the Soviet Union in a constant arms race that its economy was not able to keep up with. So in doing so, this also helped end the Cold War. So that's all I got for presidents, because any more recent, and I might make some enemies, and I don't want to. So, but I hope through this very quick run through that no one believes that the United States has ever been really isolationist, but instead has enjoyed foreign interference and even conquests at times for its own self-interest, but also has done so in pursuit of ideals of freedom and justice internationally. Now, the U.S. stands at the head of the free world, basically, with more military and economic might than perhaps any other nation before in history. This position has allowed the continuation of the liberal international order to remain as the reigning international system. Now, when I say liberal international order, I do not mean a world government or globalization or anything sort of that sort. I instead mean the set of international norms based on political and economic liberalism, liberalism meaning democratic, not American left, that promote liberal democracy internationally. So things like free trade, freedom of the seas, the existing pressure for other nations to become democratic are all products of this system and the power that the U.S. maintains. So it's this system that allows us to enjoy things like lower prices on goods, lower tariffs, things of that nature, which directly impact all of us. Additionally, it promotes the international adoption of democratic governments, which have been shown to be much less likely to go to war with each other than non-democratic governments. So increasing the amount of democratic governments in the world results in more peace internationally. This is known shorthand as the democratic peace theory. So these are the positions in favor of, the reasons in favor of keeping the United States at the head of its power and staying involved internationally. And indeed, we see great benefits from it. But American international leadership isn't a given, although it seems to be, to me, that many Americans act like it is. There are many threats to our current superpower status that, if successful, may end the international liberal order and give rise to more authoritarianism and global conflict. Indeed, many of the nations that seek to usurp us as leading power may not even want to uphold the current standards of free trade and things of that nature. So let's go quickly into a couple of these threats. Putin, he is quite ambitious and has been willing to demonstrate how he is ready to use military might in order to fulfill his ambitions. Indeed, he is probably one of, if not the biggest short-term threats to the liberal international order and the spread of authoritarianism. However, the Russian economy is not that great, and so it'll be difficult to see kind of in the future what will happen, especially after he dies. So we'll just have to keep an eye on what him and his inner circle do at that point. Indeed, something else that might help with this is after the war in Ukraine inevitably ends, is helping with nation-building efforts there in order to support their existing democratic government, as well as continue to foster their economy and bring them into the Western fold as a member of NATO. China is likely our biggest long-term threat internationally and for authoritarianism. They are no longer communists, despite still being the Chinese Communist Party. They instead are capitalists with Chinese characteristics, as they have named it. And this has led their economy to grow at a very rapid rate. They indeed have a much higher economic potential than us because their population is so much bigger. And they also have the desire to lead the world, as well as international espionage to receive sorts of technology that they normally can't get on their own. However, they are still quite far behind us economically. Especially their GDP per capita is way lower than ours. While they are not an immediate threat, we definitely need to curtail their growth in order to maintain our position. The Middle East. There's a lot going on there, and a lot of the new developments were done before I researched for this paper, so just a couple of words here. Things are rapidly changing in there all the time, so the United States needs to exercise great caution before we make any committed moves. Additionally, let's see. Yeah, I'll go Afghanistan first. The move in Afghanistan, the overtaking of the Taliban, whether you blame Biden for his execution of the withdrawal from Afghanistan or for Trump for planning the withdrawal in the first place, either way, that was pretty disastrous and showed a failure in our ability to government build not because we can't government build. We established during the Cold War that new governments such as South Korea and Japan were built by the United States because we were able to maintain a constant presence there and help them grow economically. However, we didn't do that with Afghanistan because we never really planned to. We originally went in with the intention to just hunt some terrorists and then leave, but we never left. And so by the time we got around to deciding we're going to stay and build a nation, and then we were non-committal about it. So basically, if we're going to try something like that again, we need to come in with the mindset that we're going to stay there for as long as it takes to complete. Additionally, with the situation in Hamas and Israel, with their conflict, looking at it from more of a just war perspective, it's very clear that Hamas invaded, although I wish I could have made it to Gail Helt's very fine lecture last Tuesday, but I was absent, had prior plans. But it's very clear that Hamas invaded and Israel has a right to protect itself, although you may criticize Israel for whatever grievances, they still have the right to do this. All right, so this is all seems pretty tough, doesn't it? I mean, it's different than the Cold War because now we're dealing with difficulties on multiple fronts. Instead of a united ideology we're fighting instead against a bunch of individual actors all acting for their own self-interest. So that spreads out our attention quite a bit further. So doesn't this seem all a bit more trouble than it's worth? I mean, we got it so hard here today in the United States. Crime, the opioid crisis, healthcare, education, poverty, internal fights over race, class, gender, religion, and ideology. We have so many problems here. How could we possibly spare any effort for anything or anyone else? And even if we did have these time and resources, is it even possible to have any significant change internationally? I mean, these nations are so far away, and it's not like we have direct authority over them. And then even if we could change these regimes, should we? That would be enforcing an entire people group to follow our own way of life and our own ideas of what is right. So why should we have the right to tell any other government what their laws shouldn't be or whatever they think is right or wrong? Why don't we instead just do whatever we best believe is best for ourselves and just kind of go our separate ways? Well, Here's why. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience have shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object and vices are designed to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Quick show of hands, how many people here agree with that? Decent number? A little bit? Notice within this passage of the Declaration of Independence that no part of it is directed explicitly only at Americans. These ideals are the ideals upon which our nation is founded, and they are offered to everyone, regardless of culture or status or religion or whatever else. Therefore, we as Americans should support liberty worldwide for all people, and arguments that the United States should only seek out our own freedom are either implicitly or explicitly saying that there are certain peoples by circumstance of their culture, religion, or class that are unfit for liberty. And this is an idea that is very un-American and cannot stand and must be resisted. So, now you can believe all that's true, or not. Apparently, like half of you didn't raise your hands at like the Declaration of Independence, so that's a little worrying. But surely our own problems come first, right? Yes, of course. Absolutely. The American government should focus on the concerns and needs of the American people first. However, as we've seen from the liberal world order and democratic peace theory, maintaining liberalism internationally benefits American citizens. Additionally, while the U.S. does have domestic problems, they may not be so severe as you currently think. After all, news media gets their money from your attention and ad revenue. And so the headline, millions of people have like a pretty good day. It doesn't really sell. However, if you look past sensationalism and instead towards statistics, you can see things have been continually improving for the U.S. for many years. And indeed, crime's gone down, GDP goes up. Overall, things have been pretty good, which is like definitely a hot take these days, but I'll stand by it. Additionally, if you contrast these numbers to what we are currently spending to support our current position as the international authority. We have a $9 trillion budget, of which about 13% was spent in 2020 on national defense. It should be noted that that is 3% of our current GDP. And during Reagan, when we were at the height of this Cold War and forcing the Soviet Union out due to outspending its military, that was at 7% of our GDP, even though now we are debatably in a more perilous time internationally. So perhaps we have more room to go for some spending there. Additionally, we spent $66 billion in total foreign aid in 2022, which is 0.0073% of the federal budget. That is nothing at all to the United States. We can definitely afford to up our foreign investment in order to better secure our international relations and chances of securing the international world order. I am not trying to say that our problems at home are invalid, but instead that we can easily afford to be more active internationally, and indeed it is in our best interest to do so. Now, to the question of can we change things internationally, yes, but we must be careful of how we do so. We've seen the consequences of unrestrained idealism and realism, so I propose we try a middle ground. Christian realism intends to balance Christian ideals of seeking justice and freedom for all people with what can be practically achieved in a sinful world. Best summary I can find to describe this comes from Daniel Strand, writing for Providence Magazine, a branch of the Institute of Religion and Democracy, which is founded in part by Niebuhr. Realism keeps the tension between the already and the not yet that we are so prone in our pride to dismiss. Realism keeps our brokenness and our weakness before our eyes, reminds us that we are creatures, and sinful creatures at that, who are wholly dependent on God for our own righteousness. It removes our pride and arrogance that seeks to make ourselves lords and rulers with no recognition of our limits. It reminds us that we are sinners who will always be sinners until we have been fully redeemed from our mortal bodies. If we follow this model for foreign policy, we attempt to use the position of the United States responsibly in all of its power, something that may be known as the Spider-Man effect, with great power comes great responsibility. Because we have this position internationally, we have to use it justly in the world. So, what should our leaders be doing? What does this look like practically for situations such as the Middle East and how we deal with our enemies and allies? So, in order to do this justice, I kind of have to do something I've always kind of hated when I saw Christian writers do, but the more I've grown and learned, the more I kind of see the necessity of it, and that's just kind of to rely. And the reason I don't like it is because it's not clear, because I like having clear-cut solutions and proposals of things that we should be doing, but instead I have more of a guide of what we should be doing, and I don't like it, but it's the closest to the truth that I've been able to find. And that idea is instead to pursue leaders in our government that are willing to humble themselves and submit themselves unto the prayer and discernment under God. And if they are truly seeking after God, they will seek after justice in the world. And so we need to foster in our leaders a sense of necessity to follow after God and seek his guidance in all the decisions we make. Now, I know also what you're thinking here at this point, and this is all well and good, talked about foreign policy and all that, but how does that concern my life whatsoever? I can't pick up the phone and call China and say, hey, stop being authoritarian, I don't know, maybe I'm just that convincing. But yeah, you're right. You can't on your own change how the world works. However, authority in this nation is derived from the people. Therefore, being aware of these issues and discussing them with their countrymen can change hearts and minds. And when you go, prayerful consideration of which candidates are working for their own gains versus which candidates are pursuing the heart of God and their words and actions can also make a difference. I'm not asking anyone to vote for either party or against their conscience, but instead to consider the perspective of following God in all the actions that we undertake. Additionally, the idea of Christian realism, I don't believe, is exclusive to foreign policy. I believe it can be applied in our day-to-day life. We go about our days living around and near a lot of brokenness and pain. And there is not a lot we can do to change everything about it. And indeed, trying to, in an idealistic sense, causes, in many ways, a lot more pain than doing nothing. But instead, if we can balance between what we want to do and the things that we can do, what we can control in our day-to-day lives, our actions, our attitudes, treating other people well, helping our communities, things such as that nature, we can begin to change our communities in which we live. And those can then change the states in which they live, and then the nation, and so on and so on. So, instead of worrying about all that you can't do, focus instead on what you can do. And that is kind of why institutions like King are so important. They seek to create the types of leaders that follow after God, absolutely, but also the kinds of people that vote for them, who prioritize serving God, the church, and the world. This is why we're here. I hope that you get a good job after King, you get a good education here, you make good friends, have good memories. I've received all that from King in my time here, and I want that for you as well. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I want to be trained in how to make a positive difference in the world by seeking after God first. And so that's the objective of institutions such as King, and that's why they're so important. So as you leave today, go and do the work that you were made for. Before I dismiss you, can we all close in prayer, please? O God of unchangeable power and eternal light, look favorably on your whole church, that wonderful and sacred mystery. By the effectual working of your providence, carry out in tranquility the plan of salvation. Let the whole world see and know the things which were cast down are being raised up, and things which had grown old are being made new, and that all things are being brought to their perfection by him through whom all things were made, your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you.